who were used to describing citizens of Nigeria as Nigerians or Africans, and regarding their achievements as reflecting credit on Nigeria, indeed Africa, as a whole. The following are typical of titles of front page news item and editorial articles in the pilots. Igbo young man to sail to UK is the heading of a front page story and picture on September 23, 1938. The young man is Mr. Jaja Wachuku, now Speaker of Nigeria's House of Representatives. 2. 14th West African student, 10th Nigerian, 8th Igbo in USA. Another front page story on January 28, 1939. The 8th Igbo is Mr. Nwafo Orizu, now Senator in Nigeria's upper house. 3. Igbo medical student passes exam in first class honors. Yet another page story on June 26, 1940 of the brilliant success of Dr. Eso Eguatu. 4. Editorials. 1. A model union, August 8, 1938, in praise of the Ibibio State Union. 1 year ago, August 18, 1938, celebrating the first anniversary of the call to the bar of the first Igbo lawyer in the person of Mr. Justice Louis Mbanefo, now Chief Justice of the Eastern Nigeria High Court. 3. The Igbo are coming, December 31, 1938. The very title in sufficiently indicative of the contents. These are but a few examples of the publicity given to Igbos as a group, but as against this, the achievement of the Yorubas, and in particular, the academic laurels of their scholars received, if at all, inconspicuous notice in the pilot. However, to say that Azikiwe caused the breakup of the NYM after he started to promote a distinct Igbo nationalist agenda is to build the event from the ground level only. The timing and suddenness of the emergence of tribalism within the NYM has everything to do with the colonial government's agenda to divide and rule, because parallel development can be seen within the Congress Party of India around the same time. But in 1938, Gina too foresaw the danger of a Congress Raj at the Federal Center. Accusations of undue discrimination against Muslims in the already Congress-run provinces were probably much exaggerated, but they received wide publicity. To the call of Islam in danger, the League began a drive for the mass support, which had hitherto eluded it. The League's claim to present the majority of Muslims at least began to acquire some substance. Azikiwe personally had no reason, neither on account of experience or ideology, to be anti-Yoruba. He had grown up as a Lagos boy, and it was to Yoruba colleagues and acquaintances that he had turned during his years of struggle. When making his preparations to enroll at Howard University, it was Baba Jimmy Adewakun, an outgoing student at Howard, to whom he reached out and who promised to hand over his job as a dishwasher on leaving to help him meet his board and lodging expenses. It was Akintunde Dikpeolu of the University of Chicago who inspired him to ditch his English name, Ben. It was Ladipo Sholanke in London, to whom he wrote in the autumn of 1929 when he needed a comforter. It was H.O. Davis, with whom he lodged while passing through London, and it was his boyhood hero, Herbert Macaulay, with whom he sought employment in the Lagos Daily News when he was first trying to return to Nigeria from America. Again, it was H.O. Davis who worked with him as an unpaid organizing manager when he was starting his newspaper, the West African Pilots. Besides, having had such a high-level exposure to African-American political issues during the years of struggle in America, his ideology was rabidly Pan-Africanist. The first speech he delivered on his homecoming was full of Pan-Africanist enlightenment for his people. Azikiwe wrote or said, social regeneration implied the treatment of all Africans as brothers and sisters, irrespective of tribe, so as to crystallize a sense of oneness and identity of community interest. No longer should Africans draw a line of distinction based on tribal or linguistic factors, but they should appreciate the universal affinity of all African peoples. Yet, it was Azikiwe who, soon after joining the Nigerian youth movement, which had been birthed on ideals of oneness, began drawing very bold lines of distinction based on tribal or linguistic factors, culminating in the death of that organization. That this started around the same time that Jinnah started to play the sectarian card in India leads to the conclusion that the change in Azikiwe was due to influences beyond himself. The explanation is to be found in the ground which the Babylon was laying in the south for tribalism to germinate. Azikiwe's New Year resolution that Azikiwe on his way back home after a 9-year sojourn in America chose to spend the summer of 1934 in London is not particularly remarkable, especially given the correspondence that he had been having with the West African Students' Union from America and with friends of his in London, like H.O. Davies, that in the course of that short stay in London, he ran into the empire's chief strategist for colonial policy and later Lugard's biographer, Marjorie Perham, and spent a weekend at our country home in Abingdon, Berkshire. May have just been a happy coincidence. What followed cannot be so described. Azikiwe, in his autobiography, notes that Perham gave him special mention in a work, Native Administration in Nigeria, which was published in 1937, the same year as his formal entry into the Nigerian political stage, and the same year in which Babylon decided upon the reversal of the amalgamation of southern Nigeria. On page 361 of a book cited above, I detected a direct reference to me. He said, the ambitions of the educated should also be met by doing everything possible to find or create opportunities for them within the native administrations. This is not always easy. It is fortunate that the majority of the educated have hitherto been from the Yoruba country, where the local governments are large enough to employ some, at least, of their more civilized members. But what scope, to quote a recent example, can the rudimentary Igbo group offer to one of the tribe who has spent 10 years at American University accumulating academic qualifications? By the time of this encounter in London with Miss Perham, Nnamdi Azikiwe had become disillusioned with life. In 1930, renewed money problems had forced him to abandon his PhD program at Columbia and returned home. He calculated that his prospect at home as a pioneer of the new educated Igbo elite would be better than whatever he could hope to achieve in America. Before he set off, he sent various applications for employment in Nigeria. What he met was a concrete wall of unemployment. He had applied for work to the education department and the police department of the colonial administration and to the newspapers and the various Christian missions. He had applied to the Nigerian banks and finance companies for a loan to start his own newspaper, all to no avail. He had scaled all obstacles to attain the highest level of education and an appointment as a lecturer in political science in America, only to find himself unemployable in his own homeland. The stark reality was that under a colonial regime, occupied with calculations on prolonging its hold on its colonies, educated natives, particularly those tutored in political science in America, the first rebel colony of the empire, were the least desirables of all undesirables. What was now apparent to Azikiwe was that colonial government controlled virtually all the gateways to employment in Nigeria, which is education led to. So Azikiwe, the scar of 1776 American independence was to be likened to the differences between two friends, like China, where it might be patched up, but it was always visible. The scar of 1776 was the price the African who was educated in America was bound to pay for having dared to proceed to America, where one could imbibe the spirit of 1776. Even an attempt to get employment with the Ethiopian and Liberian governments, the latter being a country on which he had become something of an authority whilst teaching in America, soon brought home to him the realities of his Pan-Africanist ideals. The realization that he was a foreigner, even in Africa, led him to make the following resolution before leaving America to set his value system. On the last day of the year 1933, the realities of unemployment inspired me to make a New Year resolution in the form of a solemn vow made up of 5 points. Here is the text. Azikiwe wrote this, so his New Year resolution in 1934. He wrote this at the end of the year 1933, since he couldn't find any job anywhere. So he made a resolution, 5. He said, having ardently sought for the opportunity to better my lot in life, having bravely crossed the Atlantic Ocean in quest of knowledge and wisdom, having passed through the crucible of unemployment and worked hard as an unskilled laborer and a menial worker, having worked and whistled my way through university, partly because of my faith, perseverance, and diligence, and partly on account of the charitable disposition of kind-hearted human beings. Having succeeded in realizing my dreams for academic honors, because of my supreme determination, resoluteness, and willpower, in spite of man-made handicaps and other imponderables of human life, I, Benjamin Nnamdi Azikiwe, hereby make this solemn vow before God and man. First, that henceforth I shall dedicate my life to the emancipation of the continent of Africa from the shackles of imperialism and to the redemption of my country from the manacles of foreign rule. Secondly, that in order to earn an honest living henceforth, I shall devote my energies either to work on my own or to work for others, with the sole aim of accumulating wealth to ensure that I shall never be in want. Thirdly, that I shall utilize my earned income to secure my enjoyment of a high standard of living and also to give a helping hand to the needy. Fourthly, that henceforth I shall be charitably disposed towards all human beings and do all I can to be philanthropic, so as to make life less irksome for the underprivileged. Finally, that henceforth I shall strive to my utmost to live as a true Christian, forgiving those who offend me, forgetting the evils perpetrated against me, and praying fervently to God to forgive my sins and to forget my shortcomings. Made at Houston Hall, Lincoln University, December 31, 1933. After so many years of honest endeavor to improve himself, he had come full circle to what seemed a life with no future. He was effectively back to the point of helplessness which had driven him to his earlier suicide attempt. The only escape that opened to him from his desperate state was an opportunity in the Gold Coast, Ghana, to help establish a new newspaper, the African Morning Post. He was driven to bare his soul in an exchange of correspondence with one Dr. Thomas Jesse Jones, educational director of the Phelps Stokes Fund, to whom he wrote to announce his plan to return to Africa. I have come to the end of the road. My immediate aim is to aid in bringing about mutual understanding between the people of Nigeria and the British government and mission in Nigeria. It might be of advantage to join hands with the effort of the government and the missions. This seems to be practicable because such a connection should benefit the Africans. In the past, I must confess that I had doubted the possibility of such a program. Probably the flame of youth was responsible. But with the passing of the years and as one grows older, it becomes evident that the only practical and workable way is the cooperation of the kind advocated by the later Booker T. Washington. I sincerely believe that I will cooperate fully and can be used as a means of better understanding between the indigenous Africans of my country and the various agencies of the British government and the mission in Nigeria. Azikiwe's admission of defeat in his personal struggle against the British colonial powers and his declaration of his new readiness to work with them formed the basis of his emergence as the political leader of the Eastern region, and goes to explain the special relationship that developed between Azikiwe, the British, and the Fulani political leaders of the North. Through Peram's agency, Azikiwe, whilst still in London, in quick succession had meetings with Sir William Edgar Hunt, the Lieutenant Governor of the Southern Provinces, Major Hans Visca, formerly Director of Education for the Northern Provinces of Nigeria, and with the Colonial Office team. What seemed to have happened is that Peram and our friends implanted a fear of Yoruba domination of post-colonial Nigeria into Azikiwe's mind, in much the same way as they were to implant the fears of Southern domination in the minds of the Northern political leadership to bestir them into competition. The British side wasted no time in delivering on their part of the bargain to make Azikiwe leader of the Igbos, with the mission of arousing and uniting them into a political force to compete with the Yorubas. Heralded as the first indigenous Igbo graduate, ahead of his homecoming into Nigeria, arrangements had been put in place for the Committee of Igbo Gentlemen in Lagos and across the East to prepare welcoming parties at which the dawn of a new era in educational and cultural aspirations of the rising generation of the Igbo country and Nigeria would be proclaimed before audiences ranging from 10,000 in Onitsha to 20,000 in Calabar. In Port Harcourt, the chairman of the occasion was Reverend L.R. Potts Johnson. In Enugu, it was Reverend A.W. Howells, while in Aba, it was Mr. S.I. Simon. At each gathering, what Azikiwe called a heavy purse was given to him. The one that took place on 26 November 1934 at the Masonic Hall in Onitsha was a special one for non-native African residents of Onitsha, where he was enjoined to aim for the accomplishment of the prayer of the Christ, that all may be one. With his degrees in political science and with the speaking opportunities that had been arranged for him by his new friends in the colonial office. Hang on. Okay, sorry, one second. There's something on there that shouldn't. So I'll take it out. Man, let's continue. So they say with his degree, or hang on, I'll take it up. I'll take that paragraph again. With his degrees in political science and with the speaking opportunities that had been arranged for him by his new friends in the colonial office, by the end of his tour of the Igbo country in November 1934, Azikiwe was the undisputed political leader of the Igbos and the main political figure in the Eastern region. The Pan-Africanists had been turned into an ethnic champion, to the extent that he spoke against tribalism. He spoke against tribalism was aimed at the need for unity of. So here is what he said. He said, I welcome the two Igbo delegations and informed them that, first and foremost, I was a son of humanity and a citizen of the world. I submitted that my place of birth was an accident. Neither Onitsha, nor Nigeria, nor Africa could correctly claim me because I was of the earth and I belong to the earth, irrespective of geographical and other man-made boundaries. But I did not want to be too idealistic in my view of the mission of man in the world. So I asked them what were the tribal affinities of their constituencies. They replied that they were all Igbo-speaking people. Then I questioned why a house should be divided against itself. Following this tour of the Igbo nation, Azikiwe left Nigeria to take up his job with the Morning Post in Accra, where he would learn his trade in political journalism. Controversy soon followed him as he was castigated as a bird of passage who had nothing at stake in Ghana but to pit brother against brother. At the public gathering at the Native Court Hall, Onitsha, back in November 1934, before his departure for Accra, there was one speaker of special significance whom Azikiwe refers to as his friend, counselor and guide. The man, John Morris Stuart Young, was a homosexual, a pedophile, a master forger, and an ex-convict. For all these reasons, he had been an outcast from English society. But now he was a pillar of society in Azikiwe's hometown, Onitsha, where he lived for over 50 years before his death. His body remains buried there. Stuart Young had relocated to Nigeria in 1905 to reinvent himself, and he did so to great effect, including awarding himself the academic title of Dr. John Morris Stuart Young. Even though he had never been to university, starting out in the palm oil trade in Onitsha as a common palm oil ruffian, he soon became one of the richest European traders in Nigeria. This spectacular rise from a poor white to merchant prince gave him the means to indulge his passion from his home, the quaintly named the Little House of No Regrets, New Market Road, Onitsha. First among his passion was his passion for young boys. Several local historians and senior men in Onitsha testified to Stuart Young's passionate lifelong interest in young African men. He subsidized and sponsored many local youth during his 30 years in the town. He advised and trained several bright boys in clerical skills, and he offered employment and accommodation to other youth before and after their marriages. In this way, he built up an extensive network of proteges and manservants in Onitsha. It was a passion for the indulgence of which Mr. Stuart Young has been expected to have been stoned to death in Igbo country. But not only was he a white man in colonial Nigeria, but he was one who had been adopted by Onitsha society as one of their own. His death on 28th May 1938 was mourned throughout the papers of the Eastern region, with his funeral being attended by thousands, as Azikiwe himself led the tribute. In the West African pilot, Azikiwe takes charge of producing his friend's memory and reconstruct him as the exemplar of a hoped-for post-coloniality, a leader of Renaissance Africa, and a model to Nigerian youth. I wonder if the people of Onitsha would have the same sense of duty and admiration for this white friend of the blacks, he wrote. To erect a monument dedicated to the sacrifice of this hero to the cause of interracial cooperation, and thus make the tomb of Odeziaku a national shrine. Wow. Wow. I told you, our ancestors, they are not all heroes, they are not all villains. They were actually men, ordinary men, like you and me. And that is why you should never be the prisoner of your own history. Don't be. Be a student of history, learn from all of their mistakes, and make sure that if you have a chance, you never repeat them. That's how you can kill all this part of the dark part of the history. I promise you. But let us continue. Interestingly, on his return, in his role as the Igbo champion, Azikiwe chose to join the Nigerian youth movement rather than to set up his own group. That by October 1940, he was being summoned by the group to a disciplinary hearing on charges of violations of the group's fundamental ideals, suggests that he joined the group to break it up. By this time, the restraining influence of Odeziaku, who had preached the brotherhood of man and our oneness, our identity, our common humanity, on Azikiwe was no more. Even though members of the organization persuaded Azikiwe to withdraw the resignation from the group, which he had tendered in protest at the hearing, the damage had been done. On 20th February 1941, he used the medium of his West African pilot to announce his resignation from the Nigerian youth movement, thereby signaling a formal parting of ways between East and West amongst the nationalists. In the aftermath of the fallout amongst the nationalists within the NYM, in 1942, H.O. Davies accepted a job as marketing officer with the colonial government, which the NYM had been at the vanguard of campaigning against. In 1943, Azikiwe signaled the formal end of the nationalist consensus and the beginning of ethnic-based political associations when he launched the Igbo Federal Union. With himself as his president, Obafemi Awolowo responded to the development by forming Egbe Omo Oduduwa in London in 1945. These developments effectively marked the death of the NYM, an attempt to revive the organization as a joint council under the leadership of the elder statesman, Herbert Macaulay, so as to form a united front against the nationalists to negotiate a post-war deal with the colonial authorities was again frustrated by Azikiwe's intervention. The Joint Council was formed, and the parties agreed to share representations on the Legislative Council and on the Lagos Town Council. In September 1943, 1 month after Azikiwe dejected and embittered, returned from England, Macaulay resigned from the Joint Council. This ended the first effort to achieve a national front. The Nigerian youth movement died a complete death when Davis and Awolowo both left Nigeria in 1944 to study law in England, returning in 1947 and 1948, respectively. The stage was set to Azikiwe, who, in the same year, 1944, moved to establish the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, NCNC, as the main opposition voice of nationalism, with Abat Macaulay, then age 80, as the president of the party. The appointment was shrewd as 2 years later, on 7th May 1946, the old voice of Lagos politics died while on a tour of the country with the NCNC. His funeral in Lagos was the largest in Nigeria history, with more than 100,000 in attendance, with Azikiwe delivering the eulogy personally, and then succeeding him as the president of the NCNC. The legacy of Macaulay's Lagos political base was firmly in NCNC hands.